It's the 15th day of February, the 9th month of 2024. I'm going to be your host tonight. I'm Dana Durnford, and you can call into these live shows if you're lucky enough to catch them. We're in Canada at 709-589-4406. Hello, everybody. It's been a minute. We're going to go down that time machine. The first month, it's just because it's been a while since we've been streaming. And these shows are so difficult. A lot of people probably take, not everybody I'm sure, but a lot of people take it for granted that it's simple. It's not. And because I'm not allowed to make mistakes, right? So, forgotten fallout. The unfulfilled promise of nuclear justice for the Marshall Islands. The 67 nukes they exploded in the Marshall Islands, also known as Bikini Island to some people, was the equivalent of dropping 1.6 Hiroshima bombs every day for 12 years in radioactive fallout. Currently, there's 1 million, in 2019 studies, 1 million square kilometers, ocean included, obviously, that are too radioactive to be habitable. So it's just something that you should consider when you think about nuclear, how twisted this industry actually is. And everybody there has cancer, or many, many different immune diseases and everything else. Why Fukushima made me stop worrying and love the nuclear power, George Monbiot. When you do a search for the first week of Fukushima on Google, this is one of the first stories that come up. If not, I think it was the first story. It was this long debunked George Monbiot. That's a picture of him there, but when he was younger, we got pictures of him when he was teaching. I can't really tell the difference. They're remarkably similar then and now, right? It's really hard to tell the difference. Which one is George when he was young? Well, there was this picture here, clearly. He got a full set of teeth right there, right? He is British after all. No offense to anybody British. Send your hate mail to Dana Durnford, don'tgiveashit.com. As a result of the disaster at Fukushima, he's no longer nuclear neutral. No, he supports nuclear, George Monbiot, with the big pretty smile there. I now support the technology, he says. And this is the problem, isn't it? We got these people, they look like people, right? But when you peel off a layer, this is what you end up with. That's an actual monster. That's the definition of a monster who refused to acknowledge the brutal. And then, because it's the first, if I got a date on this particular story, I'm sorry. It was the first week, anyway. One of his assertions that nuclear Fukushima wasn't bad was because no one had received a lethal dose of radiation, according to George Monbiot, despite the fact that you had 38 reactor cores detonate. There was, within 1 year, an extra 865,000 cancers. And so I would love to ask George Monbiot, does he think that's appropriate to suggest that there was no adverse side effects? You're going to hear the word iodine and 131 in particular. And you're going to hear cesium-137 a lot, no matter where you do. If you're looking at this subject, that'll be the typical, the pro-nuclear trolls will talk about that stuff. I think it's important that, because a lot of people don't appreciate what nuclear can do, radioactive fallout, because you can't see it or smell it or hear it or feel it or touch it or pick it up or throw rocks at it or anything. So they took 144 beagle dogs. This was a study by Loveless Respiratory Research Institute in New Mexico. Dr. Raymond Gilmedy was the lead author. And his specialty is killing beagle dogs and beagle puppies. Death from the radiation, that is, they were given a single monodispersal inhalation because a beagle dog got a big nose. And death from radiation started from 1.5 years to 5.4 years after the exposure. Tumors, there was 3 different tumors typically associated with plutonium. So if you inhale plutonium, then you would typically get 3 different tumors. And tumors of the lungs, the skeleton, and the liver started occurring about 3 years later, but death would occur 1.5 years, as early as 1.5 years. Tumors takes a little while to show up. And bone tumors were found in 93 dogs, were the most common cause of death. And lung tumors found in 46 dogs were the second most common cause of death. And liver tumors found in 20 dogs were the most common cause, or occurred later than the tumors in the bones and lungs. And the tumors in those 3 organs, and your bone is, I don't know if you describe your bone as an organ, but maybe you do. Your skeleton is an organ. I guess so, eh? These often occurred in the same animals were competing causes of death, but they're all induced by the plutonium contamination. And these findings in dogs suggest a similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans accidentally exposed to plutonium-238. But it was discovered that human kidneys are at least 50 times less efficient than the dog's kidneys were, or animal kidneys were, at removing plutonium. So the humans were 50 times more vulnerable than a dog. And this is the same academic, Loveless Respiratory Research Institute in Albuquerque, New Mexico, had done studies on fuel rods, and that curium isotopes are the major byproduct. So don't think of it as like just alpha or betas or gammas or neutrons. But out of all of them combined, which is over 1,000 isotopes that we're concerned about, and everybody should be, or would be if they understood it, are the major curium. Now, in studies shows that you need lead shielding 20 times thicker for curium than you do for plutonium. That'll give you an idea of how much energy we're talking about. And because it's hard to comprehend the enormity of it if you're not familiar with the subject, but they pulse energy. And what I mean by that is there's an explosion in every direction, almost at the speed of light. But they have different, some of them can't get through a paper bag, but the majority of them certainly can. So when you look at that and you think about what George Monbiot said, and you take into consideration that in the first year, the very first year, there was 865,000 extra cancers, and not everybody has health care, not everybody was diagnosed, and cancer isn't the only adverse, devastating, life-threatening illness or disease or autoimmune deficiency associated with radiation. Okay, so now I think we're set up now for the rest of the night. I just, sometimes, because it's been a while, I just want to reinforce how nasty this stuff actually is. The meltdown that wasn't Jeff Brumfield. Now, we covered Jeff quite a bit over the years. And that's a study he put up. Now, we got pictures of Jeff. That's an actual picture. I know what you're saying, Dana. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. That's a picture of Jeff Brumfield. I swear. I swear on the nuclear Bible. How a handful of operators that are crippled, and now the buildings were clearly not crippled. They're completely destroyed. averted a greater catastrophe at the Fukushima plant. And this study was published 11 days after Fukushima started to melt down. So within 11 days, there was a study published, and that study was quoted in the pro-nuclear apologist media as authoritative by Jeff Blumfield, right? And you can't access it unless you do the institute. But what it was is the media was fed the story through emails or something, and then they would quote that and link to the study, but people couldn't read the study because that's the game that they like to play. Fukushima, the new Chernobyl, and this is April of January, February, March. That was April 14th, yeah. Well, Fukushima Daiichi won't be another Chernobyl. Michael Marshall. I thought I had a picture of him there. Apparently I didn't, because I'm way too pathetic. I think I can remember that though. Hang on, bear with me. I guess not. Oh, there he is. I got a picture of him actually. I see every academic now that we cover a perpetual amount of it. Every professor in particular, that's how I see them. And that's how you would too if you're around here very long. You would start saying, well, they must look something like this. So if you had a sketch artist, that's probably what they would draw up. Not 1986, which they're invoking Chernobyl. Chernobyl was a graphite reactor. It was a new reactor. Fukushima reactors were old reactors. There was 4 of them. So this is 2. They were much bigger than Chernobyl. And each reactor core was equivalent to about 100 Chernobyls. Because Chernobyl was graphite, these were pure uranium, pure plutonium. And in the case of the Medusa, reactor 3 was a MOX oxide, plutonium mixed oxide reactor. That's and the radioactive fallout is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. So the amount we're talking about is not perceivable by a human. You need a special piece of equipment to perceive it. But its result on everything with replicating cells is pretty devastating and is permanent. The worst nuclear... what was the date on that story? Yeah, that was the 14th of... the 17th of March 2011. The 17th of March 2011. Just 6 days later, all the reactors have detonated. So by the 16th, reactor 3 and reactor 4 look like there's a complete loss. And at the top of each of the buildings was 4 decades of reactor cores and fuel pools. The worst nuclear accident in history was Chernobyl explosion in 1986 in what is now Ukraine, soon to be Russia. Nuclear experts have repeatedly stated that Japanese situation cannot get as bad as Chernobyl. Nuclear experts have repeatedly claimed that it can't get bad as Chernobyl on the 17th, but by the 15th it looked like this. And so they were nuclear experts. They knew the fuel pools were gone, and they knew the reactor cores were gone. And I actually got a picture of some of these experts. That's one of them right there. The worst nuclear accident is with Chernobyl, which is simply ludicrous to suggest that Chernobyl had any resemblance whatsoever. And Chernobyl was brutal, absolutely, but it has no resemblance to Fukushima. Fukushima, each reactor core was equal to about 100 Chernobyls in the inventory of radioactive isotopes, anthropogenic man-made radioactive isotopes. And then if you ever see anything from New Scientist, this is going to be 100% garbage. I got a whole... we've done entire presentations just on their studies. And they're not studies. They're insidious propaganda. Just gutless, heartless, spineless, worm-like creatures. It's outrageous. These are villains. These are terrorists, basically. That's what we're seeing. Not seeing, but this is what we're able to quantify. Additionally, ponds containing used fuel rods have been overheating. There's 2 ponds at the top of each building. In 2021, they pretended that they're at the top of this building that doesn't exist, and they have got all the fuel out of the pool, which doesn't exist. This was the plutonium mixed oxide uranium fuel. It's so sad. The whole story is just so heartbreaking. How bad was Chernobyl? Chernobyl was the only event ever to be given a maximum rating of 7 on the International Nuclear Radiological Event Scale, which measures the severity of nuclear accidents. This means it released a major amount of radioactive material that covered a wide area. It's too early to say how Fukushima incident will compare. Japanese authority provisionally put the event at a level 4. I mean, just one of these reactors detonating there's around 9 reactor cores in each building. That's where they stored the reactor cores, at the top of the building in 2 separate fuel pools. And they were over capacities because they don't have a repository anywhere on the planet. Japanese authorities provincially put the event at a level 4 this week. However, the French nuclear agency rated the disaster at a level 5 or 6. And the date on that was the 17th of March. So 6 days later, all 4 reactors, that's 2 of them, reactor 3 and 4, all 4 though have detonated, and they lost their inventories of around 8 reactor cores at the top of each building, which brings the total to around close to 38 reactor cores. This was a model that the French government had put out based on the first 30 days. And they estimate what you're looking at is 1 million to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air covering the entire planet. And Canada, United States first. I mean, we're talking about covered. It's still hemorrhaging out of these facilities. It's the biggest betrayal conceivable is nuclear reactors. Have we touched a pole tonight? Hang on here. I've been pretty derelict of my duties tonight, have I? I'm not even touching a pole. Let's get up the pole here. If you are living within 50, if you're living within 50 miles of nuclear plants. Oh, that's right. I had 100 digits, and so I couldn't even put a question mark at the end of it. Instead of you, I put your. Instead of your, I put you. If you are living within 50 miles of a nuclear plant or a nuclear dump, should you move further away immediately? Yes, because all fuel is still splitting atoms. And on top of that, almost every single nuclear plant and dump is surrounded by farms as far as you can see. So you don't want to do any shopping within 50 miles, certainly within 100 miles. And if you think that radiation can't affect you and that you're better or smarter or so wealthy it can't hurt you because you live in a delusional world, then you actually live in a delusional world, because nobody's immune, particularly your loved ones, your elderly, and your children. And the 8 million species. Fukushima Daiichi runs a more powerful fuel than Chernobyl did, mostly enriched uranium. It was much enriched. There was no graphite at all at Fukushima. Pure uranium, pure plutonium. And reactor 3 was the plutonium mixed oxide uranium. Could Fukushima catch fire like Chernobyl done? And so the whole story was crafted to give a narrative, an argument, so that people can fight with each other. So anybody trying to warn them would be saying, hey, look at the pictures. And they're like, I don't need the pictures. I got me propaganda media. The media told me what to think and how to say and how to say it. They have small fires at the site, all which were put out rapidly. None of these were put out. All of these burnt out on their own. These are lethal doses as far as you can see when you're there. Everywhere you look is a lethal dose. And when you look at these pictures, you don't see people, you don't see vehicles, you don't see Fukushima 50, you don't see anybody, you don't see fire trucks. There's nobody putting out these fires, right? Or you don't see any hoses strewed under. These are lethal doses. These reactors ejected their inventories way outside of the site itself. In one case, the Japanese authorities initially said that one of the spent fuel pools itself was on fire, but then they retracted it and it remains unclear what actually happened. Well, you can see yourself. There's nothing left, say, to reactor 4 and its fuel pools. Now, the reactor was shut down for maintenance, but the fuel pools were full of decades reactor cores. They're at the very top of the building, not the bottom of the building. And that you might see something that looks like a pool over there. And that's quite sneaky of them. This is the elevator shaft. There's an elevator shaft, and you lower the fuel all the way down. And there's a truck down at the bottom of these 190-foot, 65-meter, 19-story buildings. A special transport truck will take the 50,000-pound cement steel cast with the reactor assemblies in them to a holding what's known as a common spent fuel pool, which, by the way, was right across from reactor 4 on that side over there. And we have pictures released by a drone in 2021 with no explanations. There were 736 pictures, and I've done several presentations on them, recent ones, where the drone, when you zoomed in the pictures, the common spent fuel pool and reactor 6 were pixelated completely out. And so when you say it wasn't just one fuel pool, it was 4 fuel pools that melted down, or 8 fuel pools. There's, you see the 2 red depictions at the top of that building? Each of them are fuel pools. So there's 2 fuel pools in each building, and that's where they store reactor cores for 40 years because they don't have a repository, right? Anywhere on the planet. And the majority of it is allowed to vent because everything is splitting. If it's in a fuel pool, it's splitting atoms into the environment 24 hours a day. I'm not sure how far we're going to make it tonight because it's going to take a while for me to get back up to speed. But I've been working in the background on stories, on shows, and I have 12, 13, 14 shows ready to go. And that frightens me because it's so hard to keep up with the daily stuff, let alone catch up to the... They're all very important shows on top of that. That's the worst part of it, so they have to be done. The biggest threat now seems to be the spent fuel ponds, where the water levels has fallen and temperatures have risen. Well, let's have a look at the... There's no water in these fuel pools. The temperatures probably reached 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. Like, you know, I'm just here to tell you the truth, and I'm not here for nothing else. There's no agenda outside of we got to fight for everything on this planet to have a future. I'm not just this. They portray a lot of the people that speak out against this industry. They have many derogatory names to describe them. We have much more to describe them on you. Could lead to fuel rods breaking open. Let's have a look again. Oh, well, when you look at it 2.5 years later, which is the building to your left, reactor 4, there's nothing left. The guts are hanging out of the base of the building. Clearly there's nothing functional left. And these are nuclear meltdowns on top of that. So you're talking about so much energy, it's like a rifle, it's like a sniper round at hundreds of feet. You try to run past the buildings, and you die. You don't make it anywhere. It's these gamma shines, these X-rays, these neutron bombardments, these beta rays, these gamma shines, they will melt your organ. Your organs actually melt. And say an ambulance comes by and grabs you and rushes you away, your organs will continue to melt and you'll die. And I can tell you literally horror stories of how that plays out in 10 or 15 minutes that are, it's impossible not to be able to picture it into your mind. It's so hard, it's such a heartache, it's so heartbreaking when you think about the victims. Let's keep going. However, the company operating Fukushima, Daiichi, is now set up for the fuel pond at Reactor 4. The risk of recruit lethality is not zero. This is 3 years later. Now, I'm going to play this clip. It's a 40-second clip I put together 10 years ago. And the media to your right is just a fraction of media. They're major media. It's clearly, you recognize some of the names: CBS, BBC, ABC Australia, and CNN. So the real building is to your left, but listen to what they're going to tell you. They're going to tell you at the top of the building, getting fuel out of the pool. But the reality of it is, the building is physically, there is nothing left, only this stump. So ask yourself while you're listening to this, why are they pretending they're in a building that don't exist?
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
And it's pretty shocking that many media had done that same thing. I think that's terrifying. The media. Let's keep on track here, actually. Fukushima versus Chernobyl, April the 12th. So this is long after the reactor detonated, all the reactors detonated. And this is Eliza Barclay. I got a picture of Eliza, actually. It's a pretty good picture of it. The Japanese government on Tuesday raised the ratings of the crisis at the Fukushima power plant to a level 7. That's the highest possible level on international scale, used to evaluate the seriousness of the nuclear incident. So that's called a nuclear incident. And they claimed that it never even happened. That never even happened. The decision to bump up the ratings from 5 to 7 was prompted by new data on the amount of radiation released at the plant in the early days of the crisis, not by any recent changes in the plant's status. So, again, they refused to acknowledge what happened. So the cover story was immediate. Some 370,000 terabecquerels, which is a trillion becquerels, 370,000 trillion atoms of just the radioactive iodine-131 and cesium-137 have been released at Fukushima. That's quite convenient to exclude xenon and krypton, plutonium, uranium, americium, neptunium, strontium. The list is very long. And this is what you'll notice if you start researching it. You'll keep running into, and typically they'll even mention tritium, which is really meant to mess with your brain. There is no water on the planet right now, I think, that is not tritiated at the surface. Water, deep water, I don't know, maybe. We got 80 years of emissions from 400 plus fuel pools worldwide, or 1,000 fuel pools at 400 plants worldwide. A terabekel equals 1 trillion becquerels. So I've done the math on it. 370,000 trillion is 10 million curries. And so 10 million curries divided by, say, each gram is 88 curries. So divide 8 into 113,636, and you got 3,918 grams. Divide that by 29 to get ounces, and divide that by 16 to get pounds. So 244 pounds. So they're talking about 244 pounds from Fukushima, but the reality of it was each building was around 6 million pounds. So you got 6 million pounds, you got 24 million pounds versus 244 pounds, 245 pounds. So 245 pounds is actually a shocking amount. But we're talking about 4 buildings with at least 6 million pounds in each building that have been lost. And we're talking about the full range of isotopes. We're not going to play their game, their disgusting betrayal. This is incredible betrayal. And I believe these people should all lose their degrees, and there should be consequences for doing what they're doing. There should be life-changing consequences for what they're doing for them people. They should definitely, it's worse than murder by far. And becquerels is a measure for radiation emission. Whenever you hear microsieverts and millisieverts away from the site itself, the source itself, you're being lied to. You would count it in becquerels, atomic decays, physical atoms, and that's what we know as radioactive fallout. And that's why it's there. That's why they have a Geiger counter in the first place, is radioactive fallout. Most of it spewed into the atmosphere in the early days of the crisis. This is true. You're talking about 38 reactor cores burnt constantly for several days. So yes, most of it was already released in just the first couple of days. But you're also talking about chain reactions where it's consuming at 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit steel and rebar and rocks and water and cement and dirt and wood and everything else. It's atomizing and aerosoling, ionizing and radiating those material, those physical atoms from the enormous heat, and it's ionizing and radiating them and releasing them as radioactive plumes. And this model is based on Xenon 133. You're talking about 1 million per square meter in North America. So when it gets into the atmosphere, within 20, 30 days, this is the typical plume models. The majority of them, though, the whole planet is covered typically in 30 days to 40 days. That seems to be a consensus with all the major shakers and movers, the major institutions worldwide. Though Fukushima and Chernobyl level 7's, the health consequences in Japan to date are much less severe. I mean, 865,000 cancers in the first year. Cancer is just one of the many illnesses and diseases, not immune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses that'll manifest, and they did. So to suggest that Chernobyl is worse than Fukushima is it's unconscionable because the documentation was available. I mean, every nuclear expert that's seen that knew the fuel pools were gone, knew the reactors were gone, at least 2 of those buildings, guaranteed. And so if they seen that picture, then they would have known that was true for two other reactors, 1 and 2. And if you've been around here a bit, then you know it's true for the common spent fuel pool, which had reactor cores from all the reactors. And reactor 6 had some serious issues. But in the last couple of days, I uncovered a lot of evidence of reactor 5 and 6. But we might just continue this, because I'm trying to get back up to speed. We might just continue doing what we're doing now this week, just to kind of think of it as exercise, right? Because this is such a strange subject, and documentation, and so let's listen to what the experts had said about Chernobyl when Chernobyl happened.
The fact that the reactor in Japan is 100 times more powerful than the one in Chernobyl, and in fact the two stations, the two power plants in the Fukushima region produce the world's biggest joint amount of energy, and this means of course that this reactor, which is under threat now, is far more powerful than the one in the 4th block of the Chernobyl nuclear power station, which exploded 25 years ago.
Let me just play that first part again. I'm going to turn it down just a little notch. Let me play that again. It's 100 times more powerful. Fukushima, each reactor, they're not counting the fuel pools, is 100 times more powerful than Chernobyl. And it's because Chernobyl was graphite. Fukushima are big reactors, and they're pure uranium, pure plutonium. Here we go.
The fact that the reactor in Japan is 100 times more powerful than the one in Chernobyl, and in fact the two stations, the two power plants in the Fukushima region produce the world's biggest joint amount of energy, and this means of course that this reactor, which is under threat now, is far more powerful than the one in the 4th block of the Chernobyl nuclear power station, which exploded 25 years ago.
That was Russia. We know that guy. He's a weasel on top of that. But that was the original accident, right? I think that was day 1 or day 2 that RT came out with that statement. So far, Fukushima Daiichi has released about 1/10 of the amount of radioactive material from the escape from Chernobyl. So you got 2 reactors minimum. There's 4. But at that time, there was no way, because this was the 17th of March, right? There was no way they didn't know what was going down. And this is the problem. We got 80 years of nuclear academics that can't graduate because like yesterday in the day, I created a 640 pictures with AI, because I'm trying to tell this story this week from the first week, and you got to quote all these professors, they're quoting all these journalists, and nuclear experts. A lot of times they're unnamed, or not all the time, but a lot of times they're unnamed. And I was like, well, what do I see when I hear the word professor or journalist? This is what I see. Well, I see much worse than that, clearly, right? I see monsters. Right? I see creatures that the average person is somehow hypnotized and thinks are got some human attributes. But clearly anybody that comes here regularly knows these are the very last people you're going to trust. If you're broken down on the side of the road in the desert, no water anywhere, and a nuclear scientist pulls up with water and he wants to give you a hand in an air-conditioned car, I'd say no to him, because I don't trust him. I'm going to die there now with thirst, right? But that's how little I can trust these people. I couldn't trust them. It's impossible to trust an academic, period, as far as I'm concerned. Certainly a nuclear scientist, or any nuclear academics of any type, and journalists. It's the very last creatures. These are creatures. They're not humans. They're creatures. They look like humans for some reason, but they're definitely not humans. According to an official from the International Atomic Energy Agency. And they get the job usually because they were such scumbags their whole life. And they go all around to schools and universities, and the student sees them as they really are, as monsters. And that's okay with them. They're nuclear students. When they graduate, they're going to be nuclear monsters. And, I used to advocate polls. I used to have polls. We got one tonight, certainly. I used to have polls where I would ask the question, should nuclear students have to work at Fukushima? And because they would quit, right? If they went, if I got to go to Fukushima, I quit and I'll get another major. And people would argue with me in the comments section and say, I voted no because they're just kids. Yeah, but as soon as they graduate, they're going to kill your kids. But for some reason, that doesn't seem to work on some people, I noticed. Because they're not going to graduate and go down and fix Fukushima. Of all the nuclear plants worldwide, there was no volunteers went to Fukushima. Nobody volunteered. Out of all the universities, nuclear universities worldwide, nobody volunteered. None of the students, none of the professors, none of the academics volunteered to go to Fukushima. Not even to help pick up the 30 million one-ton bags, for goodness sakes. They left it up to the most vulnerable of society. And it breaks my heart every time that I think about it. That it's so unnecessary to be that cruel to society, and the most impoverished and vulnerable of society is particularly atrocious, I would imagine, if anybody was being honest. At Chernobyl, an entire reactor core exploded, setting up a massive fire in a radioactive plume that dispersed radiation over a wide area. So what they're saying is it didn't happen at Fukushima, it only happened at Chernobyl, but this is Fukushima. And this was a much bigger reactor, and there's nothing left of the 190-foot, 19-story, 65-meter building, right? There is nothing left. And so for them, that media, to come out and make those types of assertions is just... How did we lose our way that much, that fast, and that complete? We've lost our way completely, and our universities have completely captured and compromised from a very long time ago on top of that. And so has the media. Because if you compromise the universities, who's going to get, where are all the educated students coming from to work at the big corporations, the jobs, the government, everything else? They're coming from these captured entities, right? The reactors at the Soviet plant were not surrounded by any containment structure, so radiation escaped freely. Yeah, but it done that since its inception, since the day they started it up. And America had quite a few of those reactors originally too, right? And so don't think that Soviet Union was the only one doing this. And this was unconscionable, where all the emissions were going directly up these chimneys, these very high-powered vents, to push it up high, so it would fall off site. And back then, that's when they had the concept, because the local area was becoming so radioactive, they decided to build their reactors in prime farmland. Because they couldn't contain the radiation once you took the fuel out of the pools. And that's the dirtiest secret in history of the nuclear industry. And it's so frightening, because you never see anybody acknowledging it or talking about it. They all have this bizarre blind side where that is like the ugly twin, right? The evil twin or whatever. The reactor at the Soviet plant was not surrounded by any containment structures, so radiation escaped freely. It has always been like that. And what they were trying to invoke, though, is to the reader to think that Chernobyl is worse than Fukushima, which have multiple reactors melting down, right? Chernobyl was a single building. Fukushima was 4. But this is right away. This is first month or so, right? 2 Chernobyl plant workers died on the night of the accident. 28 more died within a few weeks from radiation poisoning. And over the long term, several thousand more people were put at risk for cancer. They're talking about Chernobyl. Chernobyl, they closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom because of radiation. 9,400 farms. Around 400 are still closed today because it's like a banana and a potato chip walking in the sunshine, right? Over the long term, several thousand more people will put at risk for cancer. Like I got folders and folders and folders. I got one folder there with 1,900 studies of Chernobyl. Chernobyl was brutal. We're talking about aborted fetuses all over Europe. We're talking about sex ratio studies on the entire population of Europe because of Chernobyl, which showed a statistical increase in more males than females, which means less reproduction. But that's if it's true, going to be true in humans, and it is. And there's many different studies, right, on that facet of sex ratio, male to female population, newborns. And when you're doing a study on all of Europe, then that's going to be way more applicable to all the species in Europe. So you're setting up, that's what those studies mean. Because if it happens to the human, it's much more severe in the birds, the insects, the mammals, the animals. Much, much, much more severe. And it's information like this is why I have such a big population watching my show. Look at this, 17 people. I can't believe that. I got stage fright now. 17 people watch my show that I've been doing for over a decade in desperation to help people and educate the population. That backfired. There's less people know now than there was. If I didn't exist, more people probably would know, but they would be thinking it's like a banana and a potato chip, right? I don't know how the hell I got 17 people on my show in such a short amount of time. I know, I've been at this a decade. I was going to name my show tonight "How to Get Fertilizer, Human Fertilizer to Stay on a Stick." So we got 17 likes but 27 votes. How can we get that many more votes than likes? And bless your heart, by the way, for voting. It's a very important question, too, by the way. If you live within 50 miles of a nuclear plant or a nuclear dump, or the Great Lakes, or the Pacific Ocean, or the Atlantic Ocean, should you move 50 miles away? Worldwide, probably 50 million people have died because of Chernobyl. I'll explain that coming up. 3 million children required treatment. When you're getting treatment from radioactive fallout, is permanent. And many will die prematurely. And this was UN Secretary General Kofi Annan in 2000. Fukushima has also experienced explosions and fires, and some of the reactor's containment vessels may be damaged. Let's have a little look here. So the containment vessel is about 100 feet above that stump there. Oh, it looks pretty good to me. But the highly radioactive cores is an interesting way to frame that. Highly radioactive cores remain largely protected. Well, let's have a look again. Oh, wait now, Dan, that's not the official picture. That's the official picture right there. Oh, that's me, for goodness sakes. See, I checked around. The core looked pretty good to me. Wolf, back to you, CNN. But the reality of it is, I unless this is a 190-foot building and everything is extra large, so it looks like it's small. Well, you know where that reactor core went? It covered the whole planet. This is the xenon in Washington, in Canada, United States, Washington. The Washington was the study come out. It was 450 times background radiation, which at that time was 30 decays a second average. So multiply 30 by 450,000, 15, 16 million, or 15 million, say, right? Per cubic meter of air. I think this one is, yeah. So up until your top left-hand corner is 20 days of radioactive fallout, but that's based on venting. It's not based on the lost, the actual lost inventories of a single reactor, let alone all of them and their fuel pools. The long-term health effects of that exposure remain unknown, but that's simply not true. That's so far from the truth. And that's this guy here. Well, that's a depiction of him. That's Professor Francis Livin. The long-term health effects of the exposure remains unknown. I wasn't going to challenge that. But I feel it's such a dishonest statement. And it's one of the big problems with the industries where you'll hear, whenever there's an accident, they'll say that about the radioactive fallout. Well, long-term health effects are unknown. Well, let's have a look at the health effects from radioactive fallout, shall we? It won't take too long, I promise you. Problem with Chernobyl, for instance, is there's just so I have so much. I have so much. I got so many directions I can go into. And all of it is very complicated because you don't want to just skip over anything. Let's go this way. The problem is forever, because every time you have a forest fire, you just reliberated the radioactive fallout back into the ecosystem. So don't forget that. Let me just run you through. I'm not going to go through a bunch because I like doing it too much and I don't want to do it all the time. Leukemia incidences after iodine-131 exposures. You can see all the academics participating in these studies. Effects of radiation on reproduction system. So the statement was, the long-term health effects of radiation exposures remain unknown. Now remember, it covered the whole planet. Don't forget that. Effects of radiation on reproduction system. All these studies cost a lot of money. They're not doing it because they're just a shot in the dark, right? They're doing it because they have historical evidence, right? Parental irradiation-induced brain cognitive impairment in the newborns. Human sex ratio at birth after atmospheric. Think about that statement there. Human sex ratio at birth after atmospheric weapons testing. So they were doing human sex ratio of the whole planet to see how much damage and where the damage happened to. Down syndrome in Scotland, 1978 to 1989, and then you see the spike in 1986, 87. And that's one of the first studies they're going to do after a nuclear accident is Down syndrome and autism. there's many studies actually. And the studies you should be doing anyway are heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. These are the consensus studies I'm reciting right there. And so wherever there's nuclear within 50, 100 miles of it, that's the studies that should be done. If we had any kind of moral compass in the industry whatsoever. And this industry would shoot the moral compass the minute they seen it. Schizophrenia after Chernobyl. Birth defects, abortion rates in Austria. The influence of post-Chernobyl followed in birth defects right there. Trends in human sex acts. They're looking for more males than females, which is devastating to any kind of population of any species. Prenatal loss of 400 male fetuses in the Czech Republic. And all of these got the connotations of Chernobyl, right? So, and then secondary sex ratio trends and associated gender-specific births near nuclear facilities in France and Germany. And this is an updated study, which costs, you got 1, 2, 3 people in the study that got money from the taxpayers. And we're just looking at this stuff because their original statements is that the long-term health effects of that exposures remain unknown. And that statement irks me. That irks me. Let me go back to the beginning of this story. Way back. It's way up there, right? Dirt pigs. Oh, crap. Hang on. I think I got it this time. Bear with me. So, Fukushima versus Chernobyl, that's April 12th. So that's 31 days later. And they're saying that the long-term health effects exposure... So they told... how some of these stories are like 70 clicks long. And then when you take everything I throw into it, where like all of these studies and pictures and blah, blah, blah. Non-thyroid cancer in northern Ukraine... Yeah, because if you just look at thyroid or you just look at cancer, you're missing 90% of the autoimmune illnesses and diseases from radiation. Congenital abnormality registered in Belarus. So when they tell you that very little is known about the long-term health effects, you're talking about, this is the media that's supposed to be educating you, and it spends its entire time attacking your critical thinking skills, I think is a good way to put it. By giving you so much disinformation, your critical thinking skills are based upon a flawed, a terribly, purposefully flawed ideology, right? And there's a reason they do it. I don't know what that reason is, besides that's what they've done their whole life. Their parents done it, I would imagine their parents done it. Followed from the Chernobyl accident and overall cancer incidences in Finland. Down syndrome time clustering in Belarus. So that was 2 studies, one in Belarus, one in Scotland, that I showed you, associated with radioactive fallout. So when he makes these assertions, the long-term healthcare effects of that exposure remains unknown. It's a completely dishonest statement, right? Chernobyl fallout and prenatal mortality in England and Wales. So England and Wales, of course, is 3,000 kilometers away, which happens to be the same place where they closed the 9,400 farms after Chernobyl, because it's like a banana and a potato chip and walking sunshine. And the Norwegian and Lapia reindeer herders, which have been doing it for thousands of years, can't eat the reindeer even today because they're so radioactive 36 years later. Estimated lifetime effective doses to hunters and their families in Sweden. So when they tell you very little, the long-term health effects are unknown. And yet all of these studies are easily available. So the average person is not going to go out, and when you see that, they're just going to accept that, right? So when I provide all of these extra studies, it's because I care so much that for the truth. Because you got Geraldine Thomas from Imperial College London, and is truly one of the nemesis of humanity and the species. She truly hates us. And what she does to children with radiation is unconscionable, but everybody looks the other way and pretends that it's not possible when that's the only thing that is happening. With radiation in the hospital is a genocide. That's a genocide. There is no redeeming qualities anthropogenic man-made radiation. You cannot find it. That's why they don't attack me anymore, right? Now they just fill up everybody's Facebook and Twitter accounts and everything else with propaganda about me. And that's just the price. I knew that when I came public with my name, that it was the only option that humanity had was people had to come out and be who they were, because the world is scared. But like if I have an anonymous blog, that gets all kinds of street creds, and people quote that everywhere and share it everywhere. But come out and show you all the evidence, all the documentation, all the pictures, all the legacy stories associated, and show you unequivocally the unconscionable betrayal. I'm the bad guy. Oh, he's a crazy conspiracy theorist. Did you ever watch any of his presentations? No, I wouldn't watch that stuff. Incidences of legal abortion in Sweden after Chernobyl. Ionizing radiation, human gender proportions at birth. So how could they not know? So when they make these statements, long-term health effects are unknown. Are they purposely ignoring all of this information? And I got 60,000 plus. I actually stopped counting at around 60,000 of these documentation. Pregnancy outcome in Norway after Chernobyl. Why do you study in Norway? Early infant mortality in West Germany. Why do you study in radioactive fallout in West Germany? I thought it was only a 30-mile radius. Trends in birth and birth-to-sex ratios in research reactors. These are very tiny reactors. 1 or 2 megawatts or something, right? They put them right in the middle of your community. Those fuel rods are still splitting atoms. There's still hardcore fuel. It's just not very many fuel rods, right? But they're still splitting those atoms that are released directly into your community from the local fuel pools at your universities. That's hardcore isotopes being released. So any children or adults or students that breathe it, ultimately this is going to manifest as some kind of illness or disease or autoimmune deficiency, an injury or illness. Human sex ratio at birth in residential proximity nuclear facilities in France. Why are they doing those studies for? These are expensive studies. They have to pay people to do it. Let me keep going anyway. Remember, they closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom, but very little long-term health effects of exposure is unknown, which simply can't be true, can it? The World Health Organization confirmed Tuesday there was very little public risk outside the 18-mile evacuation zone. The reality of it was a study from Ottawa, Canada, showed the West Coast was hit with 220 million atoms. These are numbers that pre-Fukushima are just not conceivable. This is not a number that you would have found in a textbook or a whistleblower or whatever, right? It's just, you would never, these kind of numbers were not conceivable. There's nobody out there conceived. Well, the academic community surely did, but the average person, there's no way. Because this is per liter, covering your whole planet, by the way, not just. And for every iodine 129, there was the same amount of 133, and there was 1/3 as much. So there was, 7 million atoms of 132 in that same sample. And there was 1/30th of the iodine 131 in that same sample. So you're talking about a lot more than the 129. All of these are going to go in the thyroid glands of the insects, the birds, the mammals, the animals, the children in particular. And it ends up in their bones too once it decays, where it mutates their stem cells. So they have radioactive hormones and radioactive mutated stem cells being produced as they're developing. And so when they come to the birds and insects, mammals, animals, and birds, you got to put that into the equation, because that is the equation itself, right? And without that in the equation, then you're completely dishonest. The academic community is aware of it. It never goes away. It's got a 15 million year half-life. And there's no such thing as a half-life. There's 10 half-lives. So there's 1/10 life. They call it a decay, but it's an explosion at the speed of light. They use all these little tricks, right, to just make you complacent, or make it impossible for you to rationalize it or extrapolate on your own. Is probably one of the bigger things they're up to, no doubt. So 220 million explosions, not decays, but explosions. Because that's what they call them a decay, but it's not really a decay per se, because it takes 150 million years to go away. So it's an explosion per liter. Now the 132 is in that liter at 10 times at 1/3 of that, and the 133 is the same amount. So there's 220 million atoms of iodine 129. There's 200 million atoms of iodine 133, and there's 7 million atoms of iodine 132. And the 132 to 133 are unbelievably effective ionizing and radiating your thyroid glands. It's unbelievably effective of all the species, which means permanent radioactive hormones being distributed through the host's body for the rest of their lives. And when it comes to developing fish or salmon or tuna or birds or eagles or moose or puppies or whatever, or children, you're talking about radioactive hormones. And so talking about them being sick for the rest of their life with one thing or another, always something to stop them from being able to achieve or live a normal, healthy life. And it's very deceptive and deceitful how it works. It seems like a flu for years and years and years, and then they have problem breathing, or they have problem. There's so many illnesses and diseases, and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries associated with anthropogenic and man-made contamination. But when you got a study like this, then you got to put in the equation that these are unbelievable numbers. This is a study from Ottawa, Canada. To not give it the prominence that it deserves is an even bigger betrayal. You're betraying yourself. Yeah. Let me keep going here. So to suggest that the long-term health effects of exposures remain unknown, that's applicable to all these isotopes, right? And this is applicable because every species for 150 million years got to live be in a saturated environment of anthropogenic man-made iodine 129. And just that on its own is enough to wreck the species, the future of all the species. Professor Francis Livens, research director of Dalton Nuclear Institute in Manchester, England. I'm starting to slur my words now. England said they have taken stock at Fukushima. Well, this is Dr. Livens right there. Technically, Fukushima is at a level 7 Although he added in his opinion, of course, Fukushima was a low level 7, whereas Chernobyl is at the top of the scale. And how can we pretend this? How can we ignore this? The urgency of this story. I can't pretend that it's not happening. And happened. And remember, this is just a shakedown show. I'm trying to get back up to speed. It's going to take me who knows how long to get back up to speed. It usually takes me a lot quicker, but so this study is a plutonium. Remember the study I showed you at the beginning, plutonium-239? Or 238, was it? Of the dog studies? 239 is the same thing. It's the exact same. It's a little worse, probably, right? It's one, well, actually, 239 is the worst isotope, and 238 is next. So the models you're looking at is TEPCO's models, total release evaluation, but they're not acknowledged in reactor. The reactors have melted down. Just give me a moment to see if I can get my act together. Here we go. So Fukushima, those models don't include the inventories missing from reactor 4, 8 reactor cores in the fuel pool, and it don't include the 8 reactor cores and the running reactor core in Medusa to your left, reactor 3, are not in that plutonium model. And reactor 3, now don't quote me again on these numbers, there's 28,000 pounds of plutonium was in the reactor itself, the plutonium mixed oxide reactor, which was 5% of the plutonium was, or the mixed oxide fuel reactor was plutonium when it was running. It's not counting the 8 reactor cores that were in the fuel pool at the top of that building, reactor 3, that are not in the inventories. This wasn't into the inventory. Fukushima plume model showed 1 million becquerels. I might have that model actually right at my fingertip. That was a xenon 133, was it? Excuse me. Yeah, there it is. I got it. Maybe if I can get it to work here. That's this model here. And when you see radioactive fallout as global warming, you got 80 years of fuel splitting atoms into the environment at 1,000 fuel pools worldwide. And every year they're putting more fuel in the pool so there's more atoms being produced. And so 80 years later, we've got a massive amount produced each day. Because they're still producing it. It's always going to be splitting atoms. And the atoms can't be contained. And so each of the atoms is a snowstorm. This perpetual snowstorm being produced every day. And the perpetual snowstorms for 80 years are pulsing energy. Even when it's uptaked by trees or leaves or grass or ants or deers or puppies or humans or whatever, or fish, it's still pulsing energy every second. And it assimilates into the biosphere very succinct. It aggregates in fungus and so the foundation of an ecosystem, like meadows and forests, is fungus and bacteria. And we know from perpetual, relentless amount of academic studies showing how this stuff accumulates in stuff, say, for instance, like mushrooms and berries. It's shocking bioaccumulation and those types of things. But we also know we have an enormous amount of headlines on Japan for the first couple of years where the local fungus, certain fungus you'll find on the side of the road, typical fungus, radiation was bioaccumulating in it. And these were extraordinary hotspots. And you see this stuff everywhere you go normally. You don't associate it with any kind of issue. That's just fungus. There's lots of fungus, right? But the bottom of plants and trees and meadows and everything else is fungus and bacteria. The basis of the forest ecosystem is you've got to have fungus and bacteria for all the other microscopic animals to live in this very moist environment that helps break down the foliage and the litter and the decay, right? But we've killed that. And so now we have a very dry earth. And what that means is, of course, it doesn't suck up water, it doesn't perspire anymore. And so what that means is it's hot ground. It retains heat. When normally it would be very cool because it has all this water gathered up in there. And this is why we're seeing bizarre flash floods, because the ground is so dry. You get these runoffs all over the place post Fukushima. But it's also contributing to a heat sink for the planet. And the planet is turning into a heat sink because, and you'll notice that when you get lightning strikes, you have these massive forest fires that are jumping everywhere. And that's the foliage in the litter didn't break down, become tinder dry, because we got rid of the ecosystem from the original radioactive pulse event, or the big, rather, radioactive pulse event of 2011, Fukushima. We're talking about an unprecedented amount released in a single event. And so it's true, like they like to say, well, there's most of it was released originally. But the amounts that will be released every day are catastrophic on top of it. These are perpetual disease factories. That's the best way to describe a nuclear power plant or a nuclear dump anyway. Where's our poll to, actually? If you're living within 50 miles of a nuclear plant or a nuclear dump, should you move further away immediately? And you can tell my brain is not quite working by my poll. But I know what I was trying to convey to anybody that looked at the poll, because a lot of people just run by and look at the poll, I'm sure. And if they haven't got time to watch it till later, they're still curious what the poll is going to be. If you live within 50 miles of a nuclear plant, all nuclear power plants have multiple fuel pools in each reactor building. And they also have a common spent fuel pool on site. And all the national research laboratories, Los Alamos National, these are massive disease factories. And each day they're producing plumes like this worldwide. And that these models are based on venting. They're not based on the loss inventories from multiple reactors. Certainly, they're not acknowledging the fuel pools are gone. Officially, they got all the fuel out of the pool 140 foot above this dump, reactor 4, and they got all the fuel out of that pool, reactor 3, that doesn't exist in 2021 on the 10th anniversary. But the reality of it is they didn't, and we know they didn't because we have that documentation. We can quantify our assertions with an overwhelming amount of documentation. And what's interesting about the next number of days is I'm going to take you through a lot of their original stories, and I'm going to introduce you to that documentation. The INES scale was formulated by scientists. We all know what a scientist looks like, right? There's one right there, and there's the future scientist getting ready to be a monster too. The United Nations Nuclear Watchdog. The United Nations is a corporation, like McDonald's or Tim Hortons or Starbucks or something. It has no sovereignty over anybody's country, but they have got all the countries' medias now referring to them as the authority. And you literally, when you go there, you have to get down on one knee and grovel and kiss a ring. And we don't kiss rings around here or grovel. The International Atomic Energy Agency today admitted there's no such thing as a safe level of radiation, and that the standards are based on natural stuff, not anthropogenic man-made stuff. So the people that they're describing as the authority, who came up with the scales, are the same people who are not using man-made radiation to quantify whether it's dangerous or not. They only acknowledge there is no safe radiation levels. But that the standards are based on benefit. There is no benefit to anthropogenic man-made radiation. And I showed you all those studies a little while ago of Chernobyl. There are 7 scales, level 1 to 3, called incidents, which, level 4 to 7 are called accidents. And level 1 is abnormal, 2 is an incident, 3 is serious incident, 4 is an accident, local consequences. 5 is an accident with wider consequences, and 6 is a serious accident. 7 is a major release. 6 is a serious accident. Level 4 is local consequences. First off, any releases into the ecosystem is a catastrophic event. These facilities, their releases from the fuel pools alone on a normal operation should be, and were, referred to as biological weapons in the 50s and 60s by academics. But yet their assertions are based upon standards based on benefit, which is potassium, magnesium, iron, harmless, innocuous, everyday background, non-radiation, non-ionizing radiation. That is conflated with ionizing radiation to lull a vulnerable population into complacency. An explosion, what scales have other nuclear disasters been rated at? An explosion at the Koistum in Mayak, Russia, was rated at a level 6. This was a tank, right? 3-mile accident. Of course, calling these things accident is pretty dubious, really. It was classified as Category 5. Now, there was an enormous increase in cancer after 3 Mile Island. Infant mortality rates doubled. Birds disappeared. Mutations were observed. And people left their pets behind that died that week, or within the following weeks. Allegations of pet deaths after radiation exposure supported by top universities, reanalysts of the 3 Mile Island data supported. And so Dick Johnson didn't want to evacuate because he was a new senator or congressman. Or senator, was it? Or Dick Thornburg, was it, rather? And so after 3 days, on day 3, he evacuated pregnant women and young children because nuclear scientists have finally said, well, you know, if you don't get them out there, they're going to have all these diseases showing up at the same time in the future. And he didn't do it because he didn't want to cause a panic. And we've heard that excuse in every nuclear accident. And yet all American, Canadian nuclear plants are surrounded by very large sirens as a concession after 3 Mile Island, so they can panic and run away. But now they have co-opted that to the point where they say, check your TV and radio is all you're going to do, and they'll tell you just to shelter in place, because if you evacuate, you might never go back, and they might have to pay. And that is simply not acceptable for them to have to pay for the harm they causes. It's not acceptable to them or any university because it puts a burden on the rest of the industry, which is firmly entrenched in your countries that are part of the degenerate UN. If you're part of the UN, your country, and that you didn't have a referendum on, obviously, to do, some idiot in a position of authority in your country signed a piece of paper and you into slavery for the rest of your existence to a corporation known as UN with enormous amount of influence now. They were previously called pre-Nagasaki Hiroshima, were described as, were called the League of Nations. Once they found nuclear, then they were United Nations. And we'll drop a nuke on you if you don't join our mafia idiot group. Wind scale in 1957 was classified as a Category 5. That was a mixed oxide reactor that melted down. It's still hemorrhaging 8 million liters a day of radioactive emissions, highly radioactive water, into the Atlantic Ocean. And for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles, it coated everything. They didn't tell the population. We see so many examples of these accidents. And then they called it a level 6, was it, or level 5? As a Category 5. An actual nuclear meltdown with massive emissions. And the British are pretty atrocious. The government and the media and the universities in particular are literally, we encounter it a lot, and clearly these are goblins. Like, there's a name for these kind of creatures. It's like goblins. It's like really scary people. They're unbelievable cowards. Like, their level of being cowards is really something else. And I mean that in the truest sense of the word. If you see these people lectures, you'll say, that's a coward right there. If somebody picked up a big feather and tried to hit him with it, they would probably cry. They're like, my God, you can't hit me with a feather. And they tell so many lies, we can't find a single story that they were honest in. And what you notice over the next number of days, now we got, it's actually over 14,000 pictures from a recent expedition, 3,000 kilometers, 1,100 ponds, 100 communities, documenting an extinction event, doing a species count on birds, to get to, and that's a lot of work, and I'm just not ready for that right now. I need practice to get back on my feet here. I'm not in great shape right now. And I'm kind of struggling. And so it's very important that we do these shows. Even if I can't do nothing else, it's important that we keep on top of this and we keep the pressure out. And the most important part of these shows is we're always honest. These are comedy shows on top of that, because this is the greatest comedy show in history. There's no maybes about it. You got to understand the subject. We'll get you up to speed pretty quick. But it's the craziest show. The craziest stories. Like, to come out and every paragraph is either full of lies or mostly lies. Or is completely structured about lies, actually. Every story, there's not a story that comes out as educational that they produce. Everything is propaganda. And as you slowly, methodically claw your way through this stuff, because it's like a tangled web of evil, and you see all these players, and and that's why I kind of created all these. So we're over 3,000 pictures now, because when you're talking about these people, this is what you're talking about. This is what you're left with, right? This, if you're asked to describe them, you look up this picture. That's when you do it as much as we do, and the minute you see the name, you don't have to read the story to know that this is what's going to be what wrote the story. It's that bad. It's that bad. It's so bad. Well, basically, when I ask AI to make me a picture of a scientist, this is what they throw at me. I don't say evil scientist or anything like that. Just give me a nuclear scientist or blah, blah, blah. This is what the machine throws at you over and over and over. So the result is permanent evacuations of a 30-kilometer radius around Fukushima. But I was showing you studies, 3,000 kilometers away where they closed 9,400 farms. They're evacuation zones too, right? You can't sell the food or grow food there because of radioactive fallout 3,000 kilometers away, 9,400 farms, which meant they should have abandoned Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom, because you can't just contaminate. There were 32 deaths. Well, like I showed you a bunch of studies earlier about aborted fetuses and stuff like this. If it's happening in humans, it's exponential for insects and birds, mammals, and animals. Belarus bemoans a drop in birth rates after Fukushima by 50%, was it? What was the numbers right now? It's been a while since I looked at this one. Yeah, they've fallen in half. They've fallen in half. In comparison, the Japanese government said the release from Chernobyl was 5.2 million terabecquerels. Again, it's such a strange industry, right? They refused to acknowledge the reactor's meltdown. And one of the things we noticed was there's quite a few little things that we noticed about this over the first number of years. Was they kept coming down with the numbers of people that were evacuated was one of the numbers. So to suggest that nothing got out of these buildings, the only reason you would do that is because everything got out of the buildings. You're talking 12 million pounds, not 244 pounds, which is their numbers. And then to suggest that this is not even close to Chernobyl, because Chernobyl has hundreds of thousands of studies out there, and if you start looking at them, you'll find the stuff I showed you. You'll start figuring things out. They're going to feed you a lot of propaganda in those studies, so watch a few of these shows so you can get up to speed on how to go through it. Less radiation being released has a vague calculation is 5 to 10% of that released at Chernobyl. The air, 150 kilometers from Fukushima, is radioactive as the area is close to the meltdown. But the air samples in Tokyo were 270 times more contaminated with just the cesium, the gamma, 137, than global weapons fallout peak. But if you don't include uranium and plutonium and americium and plutonium and strontium and all the many, many, many significant isotopes, you're being dishonest, right? You're completely being dishonest. And if your air, and it was all the way from the nuclear site, 150 kilometers, and then the rest of the way, was 270 times more contaminated with everything, not just cesium. Idano, which is a terrible is one of the biggest betrayals to Japan in its history, is what this man has done. Everybody in Japan at some point will hate this person forever. He'll be the future. Everybody in the future will hate this person, I can guarantee you. What differs here from the Chernobyl accident is that we do not yet see a direct impact on the health of people as a result of the nuclear accident. Well, you didn't see, like, at the site itself, it was the only impact you're going to see immediately, typically. But in the first year, it was 865,000 extra cancers. So because these statements are made quite early, this is the first month, is it? 31 days in or something. This story is from. But look how long it's taken us. We've only covered several stories because there were so many lies in each story. Now, I can't do that all week. Well, I can, I guess, but it's hard to appreciate the unbelievable amount of stuff that I got sitting there from just the last couple of weeks I gathered up. Livens, we're still talking about him, yeah? Less radiation releases a vague calculation. It is 5 to 10% of that released by Chernobyl. Again, right? Enormous amount of radioactivity airborne. In Tokyo, 240 kilometers away, for goodness sakes. Catastrophic. They should abandon Tokyo, 36 million people, metropolitan Tokyo. 865,000 cancers in the first year, which means not everybody has health care, not everybody's diagnosed, not everybody got cancer. Cancer is typically late and doesn't show up for many years. So, which meant it had to be a catastrophic amount released, even if you don't know anything about the story, and you put it into the equation, it would be indicative of Japanese authorities were quick to distribute iodine tablets. They weren't. There were some people living next to the plant. They all moved away, were evacuated fairly quickly. How can you deliver iodine tablets to people when you got 1,200 miles of the coastline ripped out on top of that? I mean, these were desperate times. They couldn't even get bodies, retrieve bodies in many of these communities for like a month or 2 months. Those stories are coming up too. U.S. government model of Fukushima cesium-137 particles covering the northern hemisphere. So there's U.S. government model of cesium-137 covering the northern hemisphere based on 40 days. But then the French has a model of the cesium-137 also, which immediately damaged the heart muscle, by the way. So you expect a huge increase in heart attacks, not to mention everything else. And so their models were based on 9 days of radioactive fallout, but they're talking about 1 million to 10 million atoms of cesium-137 per cubic meter of air. These are absurd numbers we're talking about, because this model is based on the 18th of March 2011, which is 7 days after, rather. So that plume model covering the coastline and most of America and the Pacific is only based on 7 days. And I have showed you their whole model, which is based on 31 days. Let's look at that right quick. Of 1 million to 10 million atoms of cesium-137 per cubic meter of air. When this model stops, that's what we're talking about. So I'll let you know when you get 20 days. 20 days right there. 25 days. And it stops on 31 days, right? Of cesium-137 covering the entire planet. This pulses energy 600 feet every second. You have an invisible snowstorm, right, where the radioactive atoms are closer than the snowflakes in the snowstorm, covering the entire planet. And the reason the plume looked like that, so watch the plume coming out of Japan. It's a continuous plume. It's just a continuous plume coming out. And the plume gets bigger and bigger because it's a continuous plume. It never stops coming out, and it might never stop coming out. As ionizing radiation is referred to, which passes through matter, causing to become electrically charged or ionized. And so it's suggesting that Fukushima is 5 or 10% of Chernobyl. It's pretty disheartening that people like that, well-positioned people like that, like Livin, suggesting this is only 10 to 20% is absurd. It's in every sense of that word. And just remember the legacy of this industry. Look at these children in the Marshall Islands playing on a radioactive ship that was used in those nuclear tests. And that the 67 nukes that were dropped was equal to 1.6 Hiroshima bombs every day for 12 years of radioactive fallout in those communities. I think that is just that's what this industry is like though. It's so heartless. It's just unbelievable heartless. And he done the same thing. The British done the same thing to the Christmas Island, to Australia. The French done the same thing to the French Polynesians. And there's no need of it. But it covers the whole planet, not just... But the local... they took all these tropical paradises and nuked them into non-existence forever. And their only purpose is to be misery machines. And these are the nurseries of the oceans on top of that they're done to. And they knew what they were doing. It was diabolical. It's the very definition of terrorism. The entire legacy and everything the nuclear industry does, it's unspeakable, it's despicable. It's not shocking, it's not hideous, it's unforgivable. It's unconscionable, it's reprehensionable, it's spineless. Anyway, let me see here. I guess we'll call it a night here, right here. Let's call it a night. Let's come over and close the poll down. You got 26 likes. Well, thank you very much. May I have another? If you're living within 50 miles of a nuclear disease factory or a nuclear dump, should you move further away immediately? Yes. Absolutely, positively, unequivocally, yes. Please move away. Please do yourself and your loved ones a favor. Move away. And I haven't been able to catch up to James. James is really onto something. And James sent a PayPal too. We're going to play, thank you, James. We're going to play one of James's songs that I got people in my own life now can't get enough of. And he's producing a super amount of music at his website, or his YouTube channel. And I'm sure it's all free to be reused, obviously. And it's meant for this application. So I'm going to play one of his songs. And I don't want to talk over the music, because sometimes I know some people that listen to it want to hear the song. They don't want to hear me yakking over it. Okay, good night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody hopefully tomorrow night. I'm going to be trying to do 5 shows this week. And we're going to be covering this topic. And then we're going to transform over to the research expeditions next week. And it's a silly amount of work, but we'll get it done. We're back, baby.
In the Tokyo Bureau, swirling smoke and neon beams. Chicago division, fueled by heated dreams. Calm down, Charlie calls in, voice smooth as silk. Says, Dana, you're dreaming, don't cry over spilt milk. On Dana Durnford show, the chatter's turning wild, but Charlie shoots it down with that cool cat style. Unit 3's no killer, no harm to see life. He chuckles in the static, cuts through the strife. Oh, calm down, Charlie, with his nuclear charm. He says starfish are just fine, there's no alarm. His words dance on airwaves with a confident glow. Calm down, Charlie steals the whole radio show. With a snap and a grin, Charlie's voice so clear scatters the dread, dispels all the fear. Mux didn't hurt, he croons with a sigh. Science is for thinkers, not a whim or lie. Though Dana and the crowd may shout and roar, Charlie's unfazed, he's heard it all before. His swinging rationale like a soothing song. Says, hold on to logic, we gotta stay strong. Oh, calm down, Charlie, with his nuclear charm. He says starfish are just fine, there's no alarm. His words dance on airwaves with a confident glow. Calm down, Charlie steals the whole radio show.